There's a kind of man people eventually stop trying to control. Not because he is aggressive. Not because he is powerful. But because he no longer needs their approval. Carl Jung understood something most people never do. The easiest person to control is the person who is still afraid of losing something. But when a man becomes comfortable with rejection, silence, solitude, and being misunderstood, something changes. You can no longer control him with guilt. You can no longer manipulate him with attention. And you can no longer break him by taking away what he never depended on. Jung would say this is what happens when a man begins to confront his own shadow. And once he becomes psychologically whole, he becomes extremely difficult to manipulate. This is the story of how that transformation happens and why almost no one survives it with their illusions intact. Chapter 1. The Architecture of Control. Before you can understand the man who cannot be controlled, you have to understand how control actually works. Control is rarely built on force. Force is expensive, visible, and unstable. It invites resistance, and resistance is exhausting to maintain. What control is actually built on is leverage, and leverage requires a hook. Somewhere inside you, there's a need, a fear, or an attachment that someone else can reach into and pull. Maybe it is the need to be liked. Maybe it is the fear of being alone. Maybe it is the hunger for approval from a parent who never gave it, now replayed endlessly through every authority figure who resembles them. Whatever it is, that hook is what every manipulator, every institution, every relationship built on power is quietly searching for the moment they meet you. You think you're being persuaded. You think you're being loved. You think you're being disciplined for your own good. In reality, you are being steered gently, invisibly, without a single raised voice, through the exact vulnerability you never dealt with. This is why the most controlling people in your life are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who figured out early on exactly what you cannot live without and position themselves as the only source of it. Once that positioning is complete, compliance stops feeling like submission. It starts feeling like survival. Chapter 2. The Shadow. What you refuse to look at. Jung called it the shadow, the part of the self that a person refuses to acknowledge. Not just the dark impulses, not just the anger, the jealousy, the cruelty. The shadow is anything you have decided is unacceptable about yourself and buried in order to be loved, accepted, or safe within your family, your culture, your relationships. Here is the uncomfortable truth Jung forces on you. What you refuse to see in yourself does not disappear. It goes underground, and from underground, it runs your life without your permission. It shows up as the rage you cannot explain in situations that should not warrant it. It shows up as the self-sabotage you cannot stop repeating, no matter how many times you promise yourself this cycle will end. It shows up as the attraction to people who hurt you in the exact way you swore, as a younger version of yourself, you would never allow again. Most people spend their entire lives managing the symptoms of a shadow they have never once looked directly at, treating the ache without ever locating the wound. And this is precisely where control finds its entry point. A man who has not confronted his shadow is a man with unguarded doors scattered throughout his psyche. Every unexamined shame, every buried fear, every denied impulse is a door left open, and someone, eventually, always walks through it. Not because they are especially skilled, because the door was never locked to begin with. Chapter 3. The Persona. The mask that costs you everything. Jung identified another structure standing between a man and his own power. The persona. The social mask built to be acceptable to others. The persona is not inherently dishonest. Every person needs some version of it to function in society, to move between contexts, to be appropriately different with a stranger than with a spouse. The danger begins when a man forgets the mask is a mask, when the performance becomes the identity, when who I need to appear to be quietly, gradually replaces who I actually am, until the two can no longer be separated even by the man wearing them. A man who has fused with his persona is easy to control because his sense of self is now outsourced. His worth is decided by an audience he did not choose and cannot fully please. His stability depends on their continued approval, renewed daily, like a loan that can be called in at any moment. Take away the applause, the title, the reputation, the image, and there is nothing underneath holding him together, only the sudden, disorienting discovery that the structure was hollow the entire time. This is why status, image, and reputation are among the most effective leashes ever designed. They do not feel like leashes. They feel like achievements, like proof of a life well built. But anything you need others to validate is something others can use to control you. And the more impressive the mask, the more devastating its removal. Chapter 4. Projection, the hook you hand to others. There's a second mechanism Jung identified that makes men controllable, and it is subtler than the shadow or the persona. It is projection, the unconscious act of placing your own unexamined material onto someone else and then reacting to them as though it belongs to them alone. A man who has not confronted his own capacity for weakness will often despise weakness in other men, without understanding that the intensity of his contempt is a measurement of how close that quality lies to his own denied self. This matters for control because a man in the grip of unconscious projection can be aimed. Show him an enemy that resembles his own shadow, and he will pursue that enemy with an energy that feels righteous, urgent, almost sacred, energy that was never actually about the target at all. Political movements, cult leaders, advertising, tribal conflict. Nearly all of them run, at some level, on borrowed psychological material, on directing a population's unexamined rage or fear toward a symbol standing in for something the population has refused to face internally. A man who has done the work of owning his projections is far harder to aim because he has already met the thing he might otherwise project outward and recognized it as his own. Chapter 5. The man who stopped needing to be understood. At some point, a very specific shift happens in the man who begins this work, and it is the shift that makes him nearly impossible to manipulate. He stops needing to be understood. Most people cannot tolerate being misread. They will explain themselves, defend themselves, perform clarifications, chase after every misunderstanding like it is a fire that must be extinguished immediately at any cost before anyone forms the wrong opinion. This need to be understood is a hook, and hooks can be pulled again and again by anyone willing to threaten your reputation. But a man who has done the internal work no longer panics when he is misjudged. He has already met the worst version of himself in the dark, alone, without an audience, without the benefit of a flattering angle. So a stranger's opinion, or even a loved one's disapproval, no longer has access to his foundation. Jung would say this man has moved his center of gravity from outside himself to inside himself, from the reactions of others to his own internal reckoning. And once your center of gravity is internal, no external force can easily tip you over, because there is nothing left standing on the surface for anyone to push. Chapter 6. Solitude as a weapon against manipulation. Nearly every manipulative dynamic depends on one condition: your discomfort with being alone. The threat of withdrawal, of silence, distance, abandonment only works on someone who has not made peace with solitude, who experiences aloneness as a kind of quiet emergency. This is why isolation is used as punishment in relationships, in workplaces, in families, in religious communities that threaten exile for disobedience. It works because for most people, the fear of being left alone with themselves is stronger than the fear of being mistreated by someone else. Jung spent significant portions of his life in deliberate solitude, retreating to a stone tower he built with his own hands. And what he found there was not loneliness, it was information, silence. When you sit inside it long enough without reaching for distraction, stops being empty and starts revealing exactly what you have been avoiding for years. A man who has done this, who has sat with himself long enough to no longer fear his own company, cannot be threatened with abandonment, because abandonment no longer holds the same currency it once did. He has already spent time in the one room everyone else is terrified to enter alone, and found that it did not destroy him. Chapter 7. Individuation, becoming who you actually are. Jung called the process of integrating the shadow, dismantling the false persona, and becoming a coherent, whole self individuation. It is not a self-help concept, and it does not resemble the language of modern motivational content. It is closer to psychological excavation, slow and often unpleasant, uncovering material that was buried for good reason at the time. Individuation requires a man to stop outsourcing his identity to family expectations, cultural scripts, religious conditioning, and the approval of people who benefit financially or emotionally from him staying small and predictable. This process is not comfortable, and it is not fast, and it does not arrive with any clear finish line. It often looks from the outside like a man becoming difficult, less agreeable, less predictable, less willing to perform the version of himself that made everyone else comfortable at his own expense. What is actually happening is that he is dismantling the parts of himself built for other people's convenience, piece by piece, and replacing them with something structurally his own, even if it is initially less polished, less likable, less easy to categorize. Individuation is the direct opposite of control, because control depends on a person being incomplete, dependent, hungry, reactive, still searching outside himself for the missing piece. A man moving toward wholeness has less and less left for anyone to exploit, because the exploitable gaps are precisely what he has spent years closing. Chapter 8. The Price of Becoming Uncontrollable. None of this is free. This is the part most content about self-mastery conveniently leaves out, because it is bad for engagement and worse for sales. A man who becomes psychologically self-contained will lose relationships built on his previous dependency, and he will lose them without warning because the other party rarely announces that the terms of the relationship have changed. People who benefited from his need for approval will call the change arrogance, coldness, or betrayal, because from their position, it functions exactly like a betrayal. The leash they were holding has simply stopped responding to pressure. He will be misunderstood by people who liked him better when he was easier to move, easier to predict, easier to fold into their own narrative of who he should be. He will likely experience real periods of isolation, not symbolic ones, because a person who no longer performs for acceptance naturally filters out anyone whose affection was conditional on the performance continuing. Jung never framed individuation as a comfortable path to happiness, and he was suspicious of anyone who claimed the process should feel good. He framed it as a confrontation with the totality of who you are, including everything you would rather not admit exists in you. And confrontations of that scale rarely leave a man unscathed. The reward is not comfort. The reward is sovereignty. And sovereignty is expensive because almost everyone around you, whether they know it consciously or not, has a stake in you staying exactly as controllable as you currently are. Chapter 9. Why this man is rare. If becoming psychologically whole makes a person this difficult to manipulate, the obvious question is why more people do not simply choose it. The answer is that individuation requires a man to voluntarily walk toward the exact things every survival instinct tells him to avoid: rejection, uncertainty, solitude, self-confrontation, the loss of easy approval that has kept him safe since childhood. Most psychological structures in a person's life are built quietly and over decades to avoid these things at all costs, often before the person is old enough to consent to the structure being built. Comfort is easier than confrontation. Belonging, even conditional belonging that could be withdrawn at any moment, feels safer than standing alone in an uncertain identity with no one to confirm it is the right one. So most people never do the work, not because they are weak, but because the entire architecture of modern life, social, economic, familial, religious, rewards staying dependent and controllable, and quietly punishes deviation from it. The man who becomes difficult to manipulate is rare, not because the process is secret or inaccessible, but because almost nothing around him incentivizes him to attempt it, and a great deal around him is actively designed to keep him from starting. Closing. Cold reflection. Jung was not describing a hero. He was describing a man who survived his own darkness long enough to stop needing anyone's permission to exist as he is, and who paid for that survival in relationships, comfort, and certainty. This is not a story about becoming powerful over others. It is a story about becoming ungovernable by your own fear. Ask yourself, honestly, what someone would have to threaten you with to make you comply to. Your reputation, your relationships, your comfort, your image. Whatever comes to mind, that is the exact place you are still being controlled. Jung did not offer a way to make that fear disappear. He did not believe it could disappear, and he distrusted anyone who claimed otherwise. He offered something colder and more useful, a way to see the fear clearly enough that it stops making the decisions for you.